At 19, she was forced to marry the old Alpha King, but on wedding night he revealed why he chose her. The moment the crimson cord bound our hands, I felt it, the marriage contract locking into place like a trap snapping shut. My father had just sold me to the dying Alpha King for 50 pounds of gold, and my sister had already slipped poison into his wine, thinking she'd be a widowmaker by midnight. But when the old king leaned close and whispered, "Phase 1 complete. Ready to burn the house down, my queen?" in a voice that didn't sound frail at all, I realized everything I thought I knew about this wedding was a lie. The great hall of redstone keep blazed with golden light, but there was no warmth in it. Belvina stood 3 paces behind her father, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, fingers interlaced so no one would see them shake. The gown they dressed her in weighed more than her hope. Layers of golden fabric so stiff with embroidered beadwork and metallic thread that it barely moved when she breathed. It caught the candlelight from a dozen iron chandeliers overhead and threw it back in shimmering waves, turning her into a living coin. A price paid, a deal sealed. She kept her eyes lowered, studying the ancient stone floor beneath her slippered feet. If she looked up, she'd see the faces, hundreds of them, nobles from every corner of the Iron Peaks, packed into the hall like witnesses at a trial. Their silence was worse than any accusation. They knew what this was. Not a wedding, a transaction. "Poor child," someone murmured from the crowd, a woman's voice soft with pity. Belvina's jaw tightened, but she didn't lift her head. She'd heard that phrase a dozen times today. Poor child. Poor girl. What a shame. Always said just loud enough for her to hear, never loud enough to require a response. Let them pity her. It made the act easier. Ahead, at the altar carved from wolf stone and marked with symbols older than the keep itself, stood the man she was about to marry, King Fernard of the Iron Peaks. He was exactly as the rumors described, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in dark ceremonial robes trimmed with thick gray fur. Heavy gold chains crossed his chest, each one stamped with the sigil of houses he'd outlived or conquered. His hair was silver, his beard well trimmed and streaked with white, and his face was a map of hard years. Deep lines around his mouth, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, eyes the color of winter storms. He leaned on a walking stick carved from black ironwood, his weight shifting slightly as though standing upright pained him. The Iron Grave, they called him. The man who had buried 3 wives already. Belvina's father, Lord Alberto Randolph, stood tall beside her in his own furs and finery, chest puffed out like a rooster. He'd been smiling since dawn, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, the kind that came from counting gold. 50 pounds of sun gold, delivered in an iron-bound chest now sitting near the altar under guard. Enough wealth to rebuild the Randolph estate 10 times over. Enough to erase every debt her father had accumulated through his greed and incompetence. And all it had cost him was his youngest daughter. The elder stepped forward, his voice thin and reedy as old parchment. "Dearly beloved, we gather under moon and mountain, beneath the gaze of the first wolves, to bind 2 souls in union." Belvina let the words wash over her without truly hearing them. She'd studied the ceremony for weeks. She knew every line, every gesture. She also knew that this particular version, the one used for royal marriages, contained clauses most people never bothered to read. Clauses written in the old tongue. Clauses that had teeth. The House of Randolph offers 4th Lady Belvina, daughter of Alberto, in marriage to King Fernard, sovereign of the Iron Peaks, keeper of the northern gates, last of the Iron Claw line. Her father's hand landed on her shoulder, firm enough to bruise. He leaned close, his breath sour with wine. "Remember what I told you, girl. Keep him happy. Keep him alive long enough for the trade agreements to go through. After that," his smile widened. "Well, old men don't last forever." Belvina nodded, the picture of an obedient daughter. Alberto gave her a shove forward. The crowd parted. Belvina walked toward the altar, each step deliberate, measured. She could feel every eye on her. Some curious, some hungry, some simply bored. She wondered how many of them had placed bets on how long she'd survive. A season. A year. Less. She reached the altar and slowly, carefully lifted her gaze. King Fernard stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. His eyes, those cold, storm-gray eyes, fixed on her face. And for just a heartbeat, so brief that anyone watching would have missed it, those eyes flashed violet. Belvina's heart kicked once, hard, against her ribs. "Your hand, my lady," the elder instructed. She extended her hand, palm up, fingers steady despite the tremor she felt deep in her bones. King Fernard's hand closed over hers. His skin was warm, too warm for a dying man. His grip was firm, strong even, and his fingers were calloused like a swordsman's, not soft like someone who spent his days idle. The elder wrapped a crimson silk cord around their joined hands, binding them wrist to wrist, chanting words in the old tongue. Words about blood and loyalty and the binding of fates. Belvina felt it the moment the magic took hold. A flare of heat against her skin. A pull like a door locking. The air around them shimmered for just an instant, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The contract was live, and with the exchange of vows and the witness of this assembly, the elder declared, the union is sealed. The dowry has been given and accepted. The bond is made. Accepted. Alberto's voice rang out, too loud, too eager. He stepped forward, nearly stumbling. 50 pounds of sun gold, verified and witnessed, yes? The king's steward, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a ledger tucked under one arm, nodded stiffly. Verified and witnessed, Lord Randolph. The terms of the contract are met and binding. Binding. Belvina felt the words settle over the hall like a net. Behind her, she heard her sister Bruna let out a soft, theatrical sob. Belvina didn't turn. She knew that sound. Bruna had been practicing it all week in front of the mirror, perfecting the delicate tremble, the catch in her breath. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Poor Lady Bruna, watching her only sister given away like this. If only they knew. The elder unwound the crimson cord, his gnarled fingers slow and reverent. The moment their hands were freed, King Fernard turned to face the assembly, his grip still firm on Belvina's wrist. Let the feast begin, someone shouted. Music swelled. Servants rushed forward with trays of wine and roasted meat. The hall erupted into movement and noise. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of goblets and plates. But Belvina barely heard it, because as the crowd surged forward and the noise rose around them, King Fernard leaned close, so close his beard brushed her ear, and whispered in a voice that was nothing like the frail rasp of an old man. Phase 1 complete. Are you ready to burn it all down, my queen? Belvina's breath caught. She didn't dare look at him. Didn't dare let her expression change. Instead, she kept her gaze forward, her face smooth and empty, and whispered back so softly only he could hear. I've been ready for 19 years. His fingers tightened on her wrist for just a moment, acknowledgement, promise, warning. Then he released her and turned toward the high table, leaning heavily on his walking stick once more, every inch the fragile old king. Belvina followed, her golden gown glittering in the firelight, her head bowed like a lamb being led to slaughter. But beneath the table, hidden in the folds of all that shimmering fabric, her hands were perfectly steady. Because tonight, when the bells tolled midnight and the moon rose full over the iron peaks, the girl everyone pitied would finally show them what a sun queen could do. The feast had only just begun. Laughter echoed off the stone walls, but across the hall, Bruna stood smiling in her pale blue gown, and in her sleeve, something small and deadly glinted in the candlelight. The king's goblet sat unguarded on the high table, and in exactly 3 hours, when the poison began to work, everything Alberto and Bruna had planned would either succeed or turn back on them in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Chapter 2, The Ice Tower. The feast dragged on for hours. Belvina sat at the high table, silent and still as a painted doll, while the hall roared with noise around her. Laughter, music, the clash of goblets raised in toast after toast. Her father's voice boomed louder than all the rest, telling anyone who would listen about his shrewd negotiations and advantageous alliance. No one mentioned that he'd sold his daughter for gold. Beside her, King Fernard sat hunched in his chair, picking at his food with the slow, deliberate movements of a man too old to care about taste. He sipped his wine, nodded when spoken to, played his part perfectly. But twice, just twice, Belvina felt his boot tap against hers beneath the table. A signal. Stay sharp. She was. Because across the hall, near the musicians' gallery, Bruna stood in her pale blue gown, holding court among a circle of younger nobles. She looked radiant, tragic, the devoted sister, bravely smiling through her grief. And every so often, her gaze would flick toward the high table, toward the king's goblet. Belvina had seen her do it during the toasts, seen the way Bruna's hand had hovered over the wine pitcher, seen the brief glint of a vial disappearing back into her sleeve. Poison, the same way she'd killed their mother. Belvina's fingers tightened on her own untouched goblet, but she kept her face empty. Bored even. Let Bruna think she'd succeeded. Finally, mercifully, the elder stood and raised his hands for silence. "The hour grows late," he announced. "Let the bride and groom retire to the bridal chamber, as tradition commands." The hall erupted in whistles and cheers, some good-natured, most crude. Belvina's stomach twisted, but she rose smoothly, keeping her expression neutral. King Fernand stood as well, slower, leaning heavily on his walking stick. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the surprising strength beneath the heavy robes. They walked together through the parted crowd, and Belvina felt the weight of 100 stares following them, pitying her, judging her, wondering how long she'd last. Let them wonder. The ice tower was exactly as cold as its name suggested. It sat at the highest point of Redstone Keep, so far above the feast hall that the noise below faded to nothing but a distant hum. The stone walls were thick as a man was tall, and the single narrow window looked out over endless black forest and mountains sharp enough to cut the sky. A fire burned in the hearth, but it barely touched the chill. 2 guards stood outside the door. King Fernand dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "I require privacy with my bride," he said, his voice a tired rasp. The guards exchanged a look, half smirk, half pity, and left without a word. The heavy ironwood door swung shut. The lock clicked, and the moment it did, everything changed. King Fernand straightened. The hunch in his shoulders vanished. The tremor in his hands disappeared. He set the walking stick aside and rolled his neck, the movement smooth and powerful, like a wolf shaking off a too-tight collar. When he turned to face her, his eyes were sharp, clear, and glowing faintly violet in the firelight. "Well done today," he said, his voice no longer frail but deep and steady. "You didn't break character once." Belvina let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her knees wobbled. She pressed a hand to the cold stone wall to steady herself. "I thought," her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I thought I was going to scream when Bruna hugged me. She whispered that she'd take good care of things after you were gone." Fernard's expression darkened. "She's bold. I'll give her that. She's a murderer. Yes, and tonight, she just tried to murder a king." He crossed to the small table near the fire, where 2 clean goblets and a bottle of dark wine waited. He poured carefully, his movements precise. "Which means the contract is already working." Belvina pushed off the wall and moved closer, her golden gown whispering across the stone floor. "The poison, did you drink it?" "Of course not." He pulled a small vial from inside his robe and held it up. The liquid inside shimmered a sickly green. "I switched goblets during the 4th toast. This is hers now." "Nightshade blend," Belvina murmured, recognizing the color. "Illegal in 6 kingdoms. Fatal in 4 hours." Fernard's eyebrows rose. "You've been studying. For 19 years. He handed her one of the clean goblets. "Then you know what happens next. The binding clause in the marriage contract. Any harm intended for you reflects back on the one who caused it." Belvina stared at the vial. "She poisoned herself." "Exactly. Will she die?" "Not if we stop it in time." Fernand tucked the vial away and raised his goblet. "I'm not an executioner, Belvina. I'm a hunter. There's a difference." She believed him. She'd seen it in the dreams, the careful way he moved, the precision of his plans. Fernand didn't kill out of rage or cruelty. He killed to protect. Still, her hands shook as she lifted her own goblet. "To phase 1, Fernand said quietly. "To 19 years of waiting," Belvina whispered. They drank. The wine was rich and warming, spiced with something she didn't recognize. It spread through her chest like courage, loosening the knots in her spine. Fernand moved to the chair by the fire and sank into it with a sigh. This one real, the sound of a man who'd been standing too long. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We have work to do, but first we breathe." Belvina obeyed, and the moment her weight left her feet, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She sagged into the chair, the heavy gown pooling around her like molten gold. "I'm so tired," she admitted. "I know. I don't know if I can keep doing this." "You can." His voice was firm but kind. "Because you've already done the hardest part." "What's that?" "You survived." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. "You survived your father. Your sister. 19 years of lies and loneliness and fear. You survived, Belvina. Everything else is just cleanup." She wanted to believe him. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we let them think they've won. Your father has his gold. Bruna thinks she's killed me. They'll sleep soundly tonight, counting their victories. His smile was sharp. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and I'm still breathing, they'll start to panic. That's when the cracks appear. That's when they make mistakes. And we'll be ready. Exactly. Belvina stared into the fire, watching the flames twist and curl. In the dreams, you always said this would be the hardest part. The waiting. The not knowing if it would work. Do you regret it? She thought about her mother. About the way Fina used to braid her hair and sing songs about the Sun Queen. About the night she died. And the night the smoke and starlight wolf came to a 5-year-old girl and asked her to be brave. No, Belvina said. I don't regret it. Good. Fernand stood and crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, the moon was rising, full and silver and impossibly bright. Because tomorrow, everything changes. Belvina joined him at the window. Far below, the lights of Redstone Keep glittered like scattered coins. Somewhere down there, her father was drinking. Bruna was celebrating. And neither of them knew the trap had already sprung. Phase 2, Belvina said softly. Fernand's reflection smiled in the glass. Phase 2. He turned to face her fully then, and in the moonlight, something about him looked different. Younger, maybe. Or just less burdened. There's something I haven't told you yet, he said quietly. Belvina's heart quickened. What? About why I chose you. About what you really are. His violet eyes held hers. And about what happens when the clock strikes midnight. The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the peaks like a warning. And somewhere far below, in the grand hall of Redstone Keep, Bruna raised a goblet to her lips and drank deeply, celebrating a murder she didn't know had already turned back on her. The nightshade was working now, spreading through her veins like ice, and in exactly 2 hours, she would feel the first symptoms. But by then, it would already be too late to stop what was coming. Because the girl she'd underestimated her entire life was standing in a tower of ice and iron, learning secrets that would burn their world to ash. If you're feeling what Belvina's feeling right now, that mix of fear and hope and the desperate need to know what happens next, then maybe you understand why this story matters. Maybe you know what it's like to wait for justice, to hold on to hope when everything feels impossible. If you do, don't let this moment pass. Subscribe now, because when midnight strikes and the truth comes out, you'll want to be here for every single word. Chapter 3. The 19-Year Plan. Belvina was 5 years old the first time someone tried to erase her. Not kill her. Not yet. But erase her. Make her small. Forgettable. The kind of child people looked past without thinking. It started the night her mother died. If you've ever lost someone when you were too young to understand it, someone who was supposed to stay, supposed to keep you safe, then maybe you know what that kind of silence feels like. The way a house stops feeling like home. The way the people around you become strangers wearing familiar faces. Maybe you remember how it felt to realize no one was coming to save you. Or maybe you don't. Maybe someone did come. For Belvina, someone did. But not in the way she expected. It happened in the dead of winter, 3 months after her mother had taken to her bed with what the healers called wasting sickness. Belvina had watched her mother fade. Watched the color drain from her cheeks, the light dim in her eyes. Watched her father bring healers who shook their heads and accepted payment and left without answers. But she'd also watched other things. The way Bruna brought their mother tea every evening, smiling sweetly. The way their mother grew weaker after every cup. The way their father's eyes stayed flat and empty even when he knelt beside the bed and clasped Fina's hand and murmured words that sounded like grief, but felt like lies. The night Fina died, Belvina had been locked in her room. You're too young to see this, Alberto had said, turning the key. But she'd heard it. The coughing that turned to choking. The terrible, wet silence that followed. And later, much later, the sound of her father opening the wine cellar. Celebrating. Belvina cried herself to sleep that night, curled on the floor beside her bed, because the mattress felt too big without her mother's goodnight kiss. She woke to light. Not firelight. Not moonlight. Starlight. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Door locked, window shuttered. But standing in the center of the floor was a wolf made of smoke and silver. Its fur shimmered like moonlight on water. Its eyes glowed violet, ancient and impossibly kind. Belvina should have screamed. Instead, she sat up slowly, tears still wet on her cheeks, and whispered, "Are you here to take me to Mama?" The wolf tilted its head. When it spoke, its voice was low and gentle, like distant thunder. No, little one. I'm here because your mother sent me. Belvina's heart stuttered. Mama's gone. I know. But before she died, she used the last of her magic to call me. She told me what they did to her. And she asked me to protect you. Protect me from what? The wolf stepped closer. Its paws made no sound. Left no prints. From the same people who killed her. Your father. Your sister. The words should have felt impossible. But somewhere deep inside, Belvina had already known. Why? Her voice was so small. Why would they hurt Mama? Because your mother wasn't just Lady Fina of House Randolph. She was the last daughter of the Sun Queen's bloodline. She carried magic. Old magic, powerful magic. Your father wanted to control it. When he realized he couldn't, he decided to destroy it instead. Belvina's hands curled into fists. I want to hurt them. The wolf's eyes softened. I know, but you're 5 years old, Belvina. You're not strong enough yet. Then what do I do? The wolf lay down, bringing its great head level with hers. You wait. You watch. You learn. And most importantly, you pretend. Pretend what? That you're exactly what they think you are. Weak. Frightened. Harmless. The wolf's teeth gleamed. You become invisible, Belvina. So invisible that they forget you're dangerous. And while they ignore you, you gather every secret, every mistake, every piece of evidence you'll need to destroy them. How long? Years. Maybe more than a decade. Belvina stared at the wolf. At 5 years old, a decade sounded like forever. I don't know if I can do that. I know it's hard. I know it's not fair. The wolf's voice was infinitely gentle. But your mother believed you could. And so do I. Who are you? My name is Fernard. I'm the king of the Iron Peaks. And I've been hunting the people who killed your mother for 200 years. 200. I'm older than I look. The wolf's form shimmered, and for just a moment, Belvina saw something else beneath the smoke, a man's face, scarred and strong. If you help me, Belvina, we can stop them. Not just your father and sister. The entire network of monsters they serve. But only if you're willing to be patient. To be brave. Belvina thought of her mother's smile. Her songs. The way she'd called Belvina her little son. She thought of her father's dead eyes. Bruna's poison tea. And she thought of the anger, small but fierce, burning in her chest. I'll do it, she whispered. The wolf's eyes glowed brighter. Then we begin tonight. From that night forward, the wolf came to her in dreams. Once a month, sometimes more, Belvina would fall asleep and wake in a forest made of mist and silver light. The wolf would be waiting. And he taught her everything. How to move without being noticed. How to listen through walls. How to recognize poison by scent. How to hide the magic waking inside her, keeping it dormant, invisible. He told her stories, too. About the Sun Queen, who ruled with light and justice 1,000 years ago. About the Shadow Syndicate, the cult of monsters who fed on stolen magic and broken oaths. About the 3 women he'd married before. Warriors, every one, killed by the syndicate before they could strike. You'll be different, he'd said when she was 12 and starting to doubt. You're learning from the inside. When the time comes, you won't just fight them, you'll dismantle them. When? When you're 19. That's when your magic peaks. That's when your father will be desperate enough to sell you. 7 more years. She'd lasted. She'd played weak and quiet and harmless while Bruna learned to charm and manipulate. She'd listened while her father made deals with shadow merchants and sold away everything her mother had built. And when Alberto announced her engagement to the dying King Fernard, she'd smiled her small, sad smile and whispered, "Yes, father." Now, standing in the ice tower with the wolf-turned man, Belvina felt the weight of those 19 years pressing down. I almost forgot, she admitted quietly, who I really was. Some days I believed the lie. But you didn't break. No. Fernard's hand rested on her shoulder, warm and steady. Your mother would be so proud of you. Belvina's throat tightened. Would she? Yes. Because what you did, what you survived, takes a kind of strength most warriors never find. He met her eyes. You're not a victim, Belvina. You're a weapon. And tomorrow, we will start using you. She nodded. Tomorrow, the real fight began. But tonight, for the first time in 19 years, she wasn't alone. There's more, isn't there? Belvina asked softly. Something you haven't told me yet. Fernard's expression shifted. Something between pride and sorrow. Yes, he said. There's something about your mother. About the night she died. About what she did with her last breath that even I didn't fully understand until tonight. What do you mean? He crossed to a wooden chest in the corner of the room and opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in silver cloth, was a mirror, small, ancient, its surface dark as midnight. Your mother didn't just call me before she died, Belvina. She bound part of her magic into this. He lifted the mirror. She knew you'd need it. She knew that when the time came, you'd have to see the truth. What truth? About who you really are. About what happens when a Sun Queen's daughter comes of age. He held the mirror out to her. Look. Belvina hesitated, then took the mirror. The surface rippled like water. And then she saw it. Her reflection. But not as she was now. Older. Stronger. Her eyes glowing golden, her hair crowned with light, her hands wreathed in flames that didn't burn. The Sun Queen. This is what they feared, Fernand said quietly. This is what your father tried to kill. This is what Bruna has been trying to suppress her entire life. Belvina stared at the image, her heart pounding. When? She whispered. Midnight, Fernand said. When the moon reaches its peak and the marriage bond fully activates. That's when your magic will wake completely. That's when you become what you were always meant to be. The mirror's surface went dark. Belvina lowered it slowly, her hands trembling. And if I'm not ready? You've been ready for 19 years. Fernand's smile was fierce. You just didn't know it yet. Outside, the wind howled. The moon climbed higher. And somewhere below, in the great hall, Bruna clutched her stomach as the first wave of nausea hit. She stumbled toward the servants' quarters, confused, frightened, not yet understanding that the poison she'd meant for the king was now eating her alive from the inside. Alberto was still drinking, still celebrating, still counting his gold and planning his next move. Neither of them knew that upstairs, in the ice tower, the girl they'd sold was holding a mirror that showed the future. Neither of them knew that in less than an hour, when the bells tolled midnight, everything they'd built on lies and murder would begin to crumble. And neither of them knew that the old king they'd tried to kill wasn't old at all, and that the fragile bride they'd pitted was about to set their entire world on fire. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Toast. The mirror felt cold in Belvina's hands, even after Fernand wrapped it back in silver cloth and returned it to the chest. How long until midnight? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Fernand glanced toward the narrow window, where the moon hung like a pearl against black velvet. 2 hours. Maybe less. And Bruna, the poison works fast. She has about 90 minutes before the symptoms become severe. He poured more wine into both their goblets. But we're not going to let her die, remember. We need her alive. We need them both alive long enough to confess. Confess what? They'll never admit what they've done. They won't have a choice. Fernand settled back into his chair, the firelight casting shadows across his face. The marriage contract your father signed wasn't just a legal document, Belvina. It was a truth binding. Ancient magic. Older than the kingdoms themselves. Once activated, it compels anyone who signed it to speak only truth when questioned by the primary signatories. You and me. Exactly. His smile was grim. Your father signed away more than his daughter tonight. He signed away his ability to lie. Belvina felt something fierce and hot kindle in her chest. So when the sun rises, we call a formal inquiry, in front of witnesses. And we ask them, under the binding of the contract, exactly what they did to your mother. They'll have to answer. Every word, every detail, every name of every person who helped them. Fernand took a slow sip of wine. The Shadow Syndicate operates in darkness, Belvina. Secrecy is their greatest weapon. But once we expose even one cell, once we force your father and sister to name names, the whole network starts to unravel. Belvina thought of her mother, of the slow, agonizing way she died, of the years Belvina had spent silent and small, watching, waiting, gathering every scrap of evidence. I want to be there, she said. When you question them, I want them to see my face. You will be. You're not just a witness anymore, Belvina. You're a queen. And tomorrow you'll take your throne. The word felt strange. Foreign. Queen. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as prey that the idea of being a predator, a ruler, didn't quite fit yet. What if I'm not strong enough? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Fernand set down his goblet and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. Listen to me. I've lived 200 years. I've fought wars, trained warriors, hunted monsters that would make grown men weep. And in all that time, I have never met anyone with more strength than you. I'm just. You're a 19-year-old girl who spent 14 years pretending to be something you're not, in a house full of people who wanted you dead, and you never broke. Not once. His voice was fierce. Do you understand how rare that is? How much courage that takes? Most soldiers crack after a year undercover. You lasted 14. Belvina's throat tightened. She looked away, blinking hard. I was scared every single day. That's what made it brave. Fernand stood and moved to the window. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Belvina. It's doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. And you've been doing that since you were 5 years old. She joined him at the window. Below, redstone keeps sprawled across the mountainside, torches flickering in the courtyards, music still drifting up from the great hall. What happens if the transformation doesn't work? She asked quietly. What if the magic doesn't wake? It will. But what if? Belvina. He turned to face her fully. Your mother was the last daughter of the Sun Queen's line. That magic is in your blood. It's been sleeping, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, when the moon peaks and the marriage bond activates, it will wake. I've seen it happen before. With who? His expression flickered, something old and painful. With my first wife. 200 years ago. Belvina stared at him. She was a Sun Queen's daughter too? She was the Sun Queen's granddaughter. And when our marriage bond activated, her magic didn't just wake. It exploded. Burned so bright that everyone within a mile could see it. His jaw tightened. That's how the syndicate found her. That's how they knew what she was. And 3 months later, they killed her for it. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be ready. He placed both hands on her shoulders. Because when your magic wakes tonight, Belvina, it's going to be visible. Powerful. Everyone in this keep will know what you are. And that means the syndicate, the ones who haven't revealed themselves yet, will know too. Belvina's pulse quickened. You think there are more of them here? Besides my father and Bruna? I know there are. The syndicate doesn't work in pairs. They work in cells. Networks. Fernand's eyes glowed faintly violet. Your father and sister are foot soldiers. Somewhere in this keep, there's someone higher up the chain. Someone who gave them orders. Someone who told them to kill your mother. Who? That's what we're going to find out. He released her shoulders and moved back to the table, pulling out a rolled parchment. I've spent the last 6 months mapping everyone in your father's circle. Every ally, every servant, every merchant he does business with. He unrolled the parchment. It was covered in names, connected by lines and notes written in tight script. Belvina scanned the list. Most of the names she recognized. Minor lords, trade partners, a few hedge mages her father employed for security. But one name near the center made her stop cold. Elder Thorn, she whispered. Fernand nodded grimly. The man who officiated your wedding tonight. He's been with our family for years. Since before I was born. Exactly. Which means he was there when your mother died. And according to my sources, he was also present at the deaths of 2 other Sun Queen descendants in the past 50 years. Belvina's hands curled into fists. He's the one. He's the handler. I believe so. But we need proof. And the only way to get it is to force your father and Bruna to name him under the truth binding. Then let's do it now. Why wait until morning? Because right now they still think they've won. They're relaxed, confident, making mistakes. Fernand tapped the parchment. Bruna is already starting to feel the poison. In about an hour, she's going to panic. She's going to go to someone for help. And my guess is that someone will be Elder Thorn. You want to catch them together. Exactly. We let the poison do its work. We let Bruna run to her handler. And then when they're both exposed and vulnerable, we spring the trap. Belvina studied the map, her mind racing. It was a good plan. A solid plan. But it meant waiting. Watching Bruna suffer. Letting her father continue celebrating. It meant patience. I hate waiting, she muttered. Fernand's laugh was low and genuine. I know. But you've waited 19 years. You can wait 2 more hours. He was right. She could. She would. A sudden sound from below made them both freeze. Shouting. Distant but growing closer. Fernand moved to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. Guards. Running. What's happening? I don't know. Stay here. Like hell I will. Belvina grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Fernand shot her a look that was half exasperation, half approval. Fine. But stay behind me. He unlocked the door and opened it just enough to peer through. The corridor outside was empty, but the sound of boots on stone echoed from the stairwell. Someone's coming up, Fernand murmured. A moment later, a guard appeared. Young, breathless, eyes wide with panic. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's been an incident. What kind of incident? It's Lady Bruna, sire. She collapsed in the great hall. The healers are with her now, but... The guard hesitated. She's asking for you. Fernand and Belvina exchanged a glance. The poison's working faster than we thought, Fernand said quietly. Or she's faking, Belvina countered. Trying to lure you out. Either way, we need to see this. Fernand turned to the guard. Tell the healers I'll be down shortly. And summon Lord Randolph to his daughter's side immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard bowed and disappeared back down the stairs. The moment he was gone, Fernand shut the door and turned to Belvina. This changes things. She's panicking already. That's good, isn't it? Maybe. Or maybe she's smarter than we gave her credit for. He moved quickly to the chest and pulled out 2 items. A small vial of clear liquid and a silver ring set with a dark stone. What are those? The vial is an antidote. Universal. It'll counteract most poisons, including nightshade blend. He handed it to her. Keep it hidden. If things go wrong, if Bruna actually is dying and we need her alive, you'll have to give it to her. And the ring? Protection charm. Old magic, keyed to my bloodline. As long as you wear it, anyone who tries to harm you will feel the intent reflected back tenfold. He slipped it onto her finger. It was too large, but the moment it touched her skin, it resized itself, fitting perfectly. Belvina stared at it. The stone seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. This is powerful, she whispered. You're about to walk into a room full of people who want you dead. You need to be powerful. He cupped her face in his hands. Listen to me. Whatever happens down there, do not break character. You're still the frightened bride, the helpless girl. Let them underestimate you. Until midnight. When the bells ring and your magic wakes, that's when we stop pretending. His smile was fierce. That's when we burn it all down. Belvina nodded. She could do this. She would do this. Fernand released her and grabbed his walking stick, his posture shifting back into the hunched, fragile king. Ready? He asked. Ready. They left the ice tower together and descended the long spiral staircase. With every step, the sounds from below grew louder. Raised voices, the clatter of movement, the unmistakable edge of panic. When they reached the great hall, the scene was chaotic. Bruna lay on a hastily cleared table, her pale blue gown soaked with sweat, her face gray and drawn. Healers swarmed around her, pressing cool clothes to her forehead, checking her pulse, murmuring in worried tones. Alberto stood nearby, his earlier confidence shattered, his face ashen. What happened? He demanded as Fernand approached. I don't know, my lord, one of the healers stammered. She was fine one moment, and then she collapsed. We've checked for all the common ailments, but... It's poison, Bruna gasped, her voice weak. She clutched her stomach, her eyes rolling. Someone poisoned me. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Alberto's gaze snapped to Fernand, sharp and accusing. Who would dare? I assure you, Lord Randolph, I had nothing to do with this, Fernand said smoothly, his voice frail and affronted. I've been in the ice tower all evening with my bride. Belvina stood just behind him, her face a perfect mask of fear and confusion. Then who? Alberto's hands shook. Who would want to hurt Bruna? No one answered. But across the hall, partially hidden by a stone column, Belvina saw a figure watching. Elder Thorn. His expression was calm. Too calm. And in his hand, barely visible in the folds of his robe, was a vial identical to the one Fernand had shown her. Belvina's blood ran cold. He wasn't here to help. He was here to finish what Bruna had started. And if they didn't move fast, he was going to kill her sister right in front of everyone, and make it look like the king's doing. The nightshade was spreading through Bruna's veins, but it wasn't moving naturally anymore. Someone had accelerated it. Someone with magic. And that someone was standing 20 feet away, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the exact right moment to turn this tragedy into a political disaster that would destroy Fernand's reputation and justify a full-scale investigation into the tyrant king, who poisoned his new sister-in-law on his wedding night. Belvina's fingers brushed the vial in her pocket. She had the antidote, but if she used it now, she'd expose herself. She'd reveal that she knew about the poison before anyone else did. And worse, she'd save Bruna before they got the confession they needed. Have you ever had to choose between saving someone who hurt you and getting the justice you deserve? Have you ever stood in a room full of people and realized the real enemy wasn't the one everyone was looking at? Drop a comment if you've ever felt trapped between mercy and revenge. Because what Belvina does in the next 60 seconds will change everything. And if you want to see how she outplays a 200-year-old cult leader with nothing but a vial and her wits, you need to subscribe right now. Because this story doesn't slow down. It only gets darker. Chapter 5. The Masquerade of the Villains. Belvina's mind raced. Elder Thorne was moving now, weaving through the crowd with the unhurried grace of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He carried a leather satchel. Healer's tools, probably, or at least that's what everyone would assume. But Belvina knew better. She'd seen that satchel before. Years ago, when her mother was dying. Thorne had brought it then too, claiming he carried sacred oils for blessing the sick. Her mother had died 6 hours after he'd anointed her. Belvina. Fernard's voice was low, barely a whisper. He didn't turn his head, didn't break character, but she heard the warning in his tone. Be ready. Thorne reached the table where Bruna lay writhing. He set down his satchel and placed a gentle hand on Alberto's shoulder. My lord, please. Let me examine her. Alberto stepped back gratefully. Thank the gods you're here, Elder. Please save her. I will do everything in my power. Thorne's voice was smooth as oil. He leaned over Bruna, checking her eyes, her pulse, his movements practiced and calm. Then, with his body blocking the view of most of the room, he reached into his satchel. Belvina saw it. A vial. Small. Dark glass. The same sickly green shimmer as the nightshade blend. He was going to give her more poison. He was going to kill her and blame it on complications, or a weak heart, or any of a dozen excuses people would believe, because he was a trusted elder and who would question a man of faith. Belvina's hand closed around the antidote in her pocket. Not yet. Not yet. What's wrong with her? Alberto demanded, his voice cracking. Poison, as she said. Thorne replied gravely. A particularly nasty blend. Nightshade, if I'm not mistaken. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nightshade. Alberto's face went white. But that's illegal. His gaze swung toward Fernard. Who brought that into my hall? I assure you, Lord Randolph, Fernard began, his tone wounded. You. Alberto's voice rose, shaking with fury. You did this. You poisoned my daughter. That's absurd. Is it? Alberto stepped forward, his fists clenched. You're the one who had everything to gain. You wanted to make sure there were no heirs to challenge your claim. No family left to question your authority. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Fernard straightened slightly, his frail mask slipping just enough to show steel beneath. Lord Randolph, you are distraught. I understand. But these accusations are true. Alberto jabbed a finger at him. You're a monster. Everyone knows it. 3 wives dead already, and now you're starting on my family. Belvina watched Elder Thorne's face. He was smiling. Just a little. Just enough. This was exactly what he wanted. Chaos. Accusations. A reason to call for Fernard's arrest, his execution, the dissolution of his lands and titles. And once Fernand was gone, the syndicate would move in and claim everything. Thorne turned back to Bruna, lifting the vial. I have something that might help, he said softly, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. A purgative. It may be painful, but it could save her life. It was a lie. Belvina knew it was a lie, but no one else did. Thorne uncorked the vial, and Belvina moved. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just stepped forward, stumbling slightly in her heavy gown, and let out a choked sob. Please, her voice cracked, high and desperate. Please save her. She's all I have left. Every eye in the room turned to her. Perfect. She pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Real tears, born from years of buried rage and fear, and fell to her knees beside the table. Bruna, she sobbed, clutching her sister's hand. Please don't leave me. I can't lose you too. Bruna's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Belvina, I'm here. Belvina's voice shook. She looked up at Thorne, her expression desperate. Please, Elder. Do whatever you have to. Just save her. Thorne's smile widened, benevolent and false. Of course, child. Of course. He lifted the vial toward Bruna's lips, and Belvina's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. The room went silent. Thorne's eyes narrowed. My dear, you must let me. What's in the vial? Belvina's voice was still shaking, but there was something new in it now. Something sharp. A purgative, as I said. Then you won't mind if I verify it. She looked up at him, tears still wet on her cheeks, but her gaze was steady. My mother died from poison, Elder. Forgive me if I'm cautious. Thorne's expression flickered. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Child, I understand your fear, but there's no time. Then it should only take a moment. Belvina stood, still holding his wrist. There's a tester in your satchel, isn't there? The silver strip? The one that turns black in the presence of toxins. Thorne's jaw tightened. Around them, the crowd watched, fascinated. Lady Belvina, he said slowly, you're overwrought. You don't know what you're. Show them, Belvina said quietly. Dip the tester in the vial. Prove it's safe. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Alberto stepped forward. Yes, show us, Elder. If it's truly purgative, there's no harm in testing it. Thorne's smile finally cracked. My lord, I've served your family for 30 years. Then 30 seconds won't matter. Alberto's voice was hard now. Suspicious. Test it. Thorne looked around the room. Saw the doubt growing. Saw the trap closing. And his mask fell away entirely. You stupid girl, he hissed at Belvina. Then he moved. Fast. Faster than any man his age should have been able to move. He yanked his wrist free, threw the vial directly at Bruna's face. And Fernand was there. Not the frail old king anymore. The Real Fernand. He caught the vial midair, his movements a blur, and crushed it in his fist. The glass shattered. The liquid hissed and steamed, eating through his glove. Acid. Not poison. It would have melted Bruna's face off. The crowd screamed. Thorne spun, reaching into his robes for something, a weapon, a charm, but Fernand was already moving. He slammed his walking stick into the elder's chest, and the wood exploded with light. Not firelight. Not torchlight. Moonlight. Silver and cold, and so bright that everyone in the hall had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Thorne was on the ground, pinned beneath Fernand's boot. And Fernand looked nothing like an old man anymore. His shoulders were broad. His stance was strong. His eyes blazed violet. Bind him, Fernand commanded, his voice ringing with authority. Guards rushed forward, securing Thorne with iron chains. Alberto stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Belvina rose slowly from beside the table, her hands steady now, and pulled the antidote from her pocket. She uncorked it and poured it carefully between Bruna's lips. Her sister coughed, gasped, and the gray pallor began to fade from her skin. You'll live, Belvina said softly. Long enough to answer for what you've done. Bruna's eyes widened in understanding. In horror. And across the room, Alberto finally found his voice. What is this? Fernand turned to face him, and his smile was terrible. This, he said, is justice. He gestured, and the guards moved toward Alberto. What? No. You can't, I'm a lord. You're a murderer. Fernand's voice was cold. And under the terms of the marriage contract you signed tonight, you no longer have the right to lie. Alberto's face went white. The contract was a truth binding, Fernand finished. Which means every question I ask you now, you will answer honestly. In front of all these witnesses. The crowd pressed closer, hungry now. Alberto backed away, shaking his head. No, this wasn't supposed to. Who ordered you to kill Lady Fina? Fernand's voice cut through the noise like a blade, and Alberto's mouth opened against his will. The syndicate, he gasped. The shadow syndicate. They said she was too dangerous. That her magic would. He clapped a hand over his mouth, but it was too late. The words were out. The truth was spoken, and the hall erupted in chaos. Guards surrounded Alberto and Thorne both, while healers rushed to stabilize Bruna. Nobles shouted questions, demanded answers, scrambled to distance themselves from anyone who might be implicated. And in the center of it all, Belvina stood perfectly still, her golden gown catching the firelight, her face calm and cold as winter. She'd waited 19 years for this moment. Watched her father drink and celebrate while her mother's murderer stood in their hall, wearing holy robes. Pretended to be weak while monsters walked free. But now the mask was off. Now the truth was spreading like wildfire through the crowd. And in exactly 45 minutes, when the clock struck midnight and the moon reached its peak, her magic would wake and the entire kingdom would see what a Sun Queen's daughter could do. But first, she had one more question to ask. One more secret to drag into the light. And this one would break her father completely. Chapter 6. The Midnight Flare. The guards dragged Alberto and Elder Thorne to the center of the hall and forced them to their knees. Belvina watched from beside Bruna's table, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Inside, her heart was hammering, but outwardly she was perfectly composed. She'd learned that from her mother. Grace under pressure. Stillness in chaos. Maybe you felt that before. That moment when everything you've worked for is finally within reach, but you can't celebrate yet because the fight isn't over. When you have to hold yourself together just a little longer, even though every part of you wants to scream or cry or collapse. If you have, then you know what Belvina felt standing there. That terrible, beautiful edge between victory and disaster. Fernand stood over the two prisoners, his transformation complete now. The gray in his hair had faded to silver black, the lines on his face smoothed to scars that spoke of battles won rather than age endured. He'd shed the heavy robes, revealing armor underneath. Dark leather and steel, marked with symbols that glowed faintly in the firelight. He was magnificent and terrifying. "Lord Randolph," Fernand said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "You confessed to murdering your wife under orders from the Shadow Syndicate. Is this true?" Alberto's face twisted. He tried to stay silent, tried to clamp his jaw shut, but the truth binding was absolute. "Yes," he gasped. "Yes, damn you. Yes." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And who gave you those orders?" Alberto's eyes rolled toward Elder Thorne, pleading. But Thorne's expression was empty. Cold. He'd already abandoned Alberto to his fate. "Him," Alberto choked out. "Thorne. He came to me 15 years ago. Said the syndicate had been watching Fina. That her bloodline was dangerous. That if I helped them, they'd make me powerful. Wealthy. And you believed him." Yes. Yes, I believed him." "So you poisoned your own wife." Alberto's shoulders shook. She wouldn't have understood. She would have fought. It was easier this way. Belvina's hands clenched. Easier. He'd murdered her mother because it was easier. Fernand's expression didn't change. "And what about your daughter?" "Belvina." Alberto's gaze flicked toward her, and for just a moment, something like shame crossed his face. Thorne said she'd be safe. That as long as her magic stayed dormant, they wouldn't touch her. So I kept her close. Kept her quiet. Made sure she never learned what she was. You kept her prisoner in her own home. I kept her alive." Alberto's voice rose, desperate now. "Do you know what the syndicate does to Sun Queen bloodlines? They don't just kill them, they harvest them. Drain their magic until there's nothing left. I saved her from that." "You sold her," Fernand said coldly. "Tonight. To me. For 50 pounds of gold." Alberto flinched. That was Thorne's idea. He said you were dying. That the marriage would be brief. That once you were gone, we'd have the gold and the alliance and Belvina would be dead, Fernand finished. "Because Bruna tried to poison me tonight, didn't she?" Silence. Alberto looked at his eldest daughter, still lying pale and shaking on the table. "Answer the question," Fernand commanded. "Yes," Alberto whispered. "Yes. Bruna offered to do it. She said it would look like natural causes. That no one would question it." Belvina turned to her sister. Bruna's eyes were open now, glassy with tears. "Belvina, I didn't want to. Father made me. Thorne made me. They said." "Stop," Belvina said quietly. Bruna fell silent. Belvina stepped closer, her golden gown whispering across the stone. "You brought Mama tea every night for 3 months. You smiled at her. Told her you loved her. And every single night you poisoned her." Bruna's face crumpled. "I was only 8. You were old enough to know. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice." Belvina's voice was soft. "Deadly. You chose power. You chose gold. You chose to kill the one person who actually loved you." Bruna sobbed, her whole body shaking. And Belvina felt nothing. No satisfaction. No grief. Just emptiness. She turned back to Fernand. "What happens now?" "Now," Fernand said, "we get the rest of the names." He crouched in front of Elder Thorne, who had remained silent through the entire interrogation. "You've been very quiet," Fernand observed. "Why is that?" Thorne's smile was thin. "Because unlike these fools, I know how truth bindings work. You can compel me to answer. But you can't compel me to volunteer information." "True. So I'll ask very specific questions." Fernand's eyes glowed brighter. "How many members of the Shadow Syndicate are in this room right now?" Thorne's jaw clenched. He fought it. Belvina could see the strain in his face, but the binding was too strong. 7, he hissed. The crowd erupted. People looked at each other, suspicious, terrified. Guards moved to block the exits. Names, Fernand demanded. I won't. You will. Or I'll ask Alberto, and he'll give them to me anyway. At least if you cooperate, you'll have some control over how this ends. Thorne's laugh was bitter. You think I care how this ends? I've served the syndicate for 60 years. I've seen kingdoms rise and fall. You think exposing a few names will destroy us? No, Fernand said calmly. But it's a start. He stood and gestured to the guards. Take them to the dungeons, separate cells, and send riders to every neighboring kingdom. I want magistrates, truth-sayers, and recorders here by dawn. We're going to document every word of this. As the guards hauled Alberto and Thorne away, the hall buzzed with noise. Nobles argued. Servants whispered. Someone called for more wine. Belvina stood in the center of it all, watching. It should have felt like victory. But all she could think about was her mother. About the way Fina had smiled even when she was dying. About the songs she used to sing. About the 14 years Belvina had spent alone, pretending. Belvina. She turned. Fernand stood beside her, his hand extended. It's almost midnight, he said quietly. Belvina looked toward the tall windows. The moon was nearly at its peak, huge and silver and impossibly bright. What do I do? She asked. You stop pretending. He took her hand. Come on. He led her through the crowd, past the guards and the gawking nobles, out of the great hall and into the cold night air. They climbed the outer stairs to the highest battlement of Redstone Keep, where the wind was sharp and the stars blazed like scattered diamonds. This is where it happens, Fernand said. When the moon peaks and the bond fully activates, your magic will wake, and everyone for miles will see it. Belvina's hands trembled. I'm scared. I know. He squeezed her hand. But you don't have to be. You've been preparing for this your entire life. What if I can't control it? You will, because your mother's magic is in you. And she was the strongest person I ever knew. Belvina looked up at the moon. It hung directly overhead now, full and bright and waiting. What do I do? Close your eyes, Fernand said. And let go. Belvina took a breath. Then she closed her eyes. And let go. For 19 years, she'd held her magic down. Buried it. Smothered it. Now she released it. It rose like a tide. Warm. Bright. Overwhelming. It poured through her veins, filled her lungs, blazed behind her eyes. And then it exploded. Light erupted from her body, golden, blinding, impossibly bright. It shot upward in a column that pierced the sky, turning night into day for miles around. Belvina gasped, her eyes flying open. She was glowing. Her skin, her hair, her dress. Everything shone like molten sunlight. And she could feel it. The magic. Her mother's magic. The power of the Sun Queen. Below, in the courtyard, people screamed. Some are in fear. Some in awe. But Belvina barely heard them. Because she was flying. Not literally. Not yet. But she could feel the potential. The possibility. The sense that gravity was a suggestion she could ignore if she wanted to. Fernand stood beside her, his face illuminated by her light, and he was smiling. There you are, he whispered. And Belvina smiled back. For the first time in 19 years, she felt free. The light kept pouring from her, brighter and brighter, until the entire mountainside was bathed in gold. In the dungeons below, Alberto and Thorne shielded their eyes and realized too late what they'd tried to destroy. In the great hall, the 7 hidden syndicate members looked at each other in horror, knowing their cover was blown. And in kingdoms hundreds of miles away, seers and mages woke suddenly, gasping, because they'd felt the surge of power that could only mean one thing. A Sun Queen's daughter had awakened. The hunt was about to begin. And this time, the hunters would be the ones running. If you've ever felt the moment when you finally stopped hiding who you really are, when you let the world see the truth and didn't care what they thought, then you know what Belvina just experienced. And if you want to see what she does with all that power, if you want to watch her hunt down every last member of the syndicate that destroyed her family, then subscribe. Right now. Because the next chapter reveals the one secret Fernand has been keeping from her. The one truth that will change everything she thought she knew about her mother, her magic, and the real reason he chose her. Chapter 7. The King Unmasked. The light faded slowly, like dawn retreating back into Belvina's skin. She stood on the battlement, breathing hard, her whole body humming with energy. The golden glow dimmed but didn't disappear entirely. It lingered beneath her skin, visible through her veins like liquid sunlight. How do you feel? Fernand asked. Belvina flexed her fingers, watching tiny sparks dance between them. Like I could tear down mountains. You probably could. He moved closer, studying her face. The transformation is incomplete, though. You're only at about half strength. Half? Belvina stared at him. This is half. Your magic is tied to mine now. Through the marriage bond. Fernard's expression shifted, something uncertain crossing his face. Which means when the bond fully completes, we'll both transform. What do you mean, we'll both? She stopped, because Fernard was changing. The silver black of his hair was darkening further, becoming pure midnight. The scars on his face were fading, not disappearing but smoothing into marks of honor rather than age. His shoulders broadened, his stance strengthened, and his eyes, those violet eyes, blazed so bright they looked like amethyst fire. Fernard, Belvina whispered. I told you I was older than I looked, he said quietly. What I didn't tell you was why. The air around him shimmered, and then the last of his disguise fell away. The man standing before her now was not old, not even close. He looked perhaps 30, with sharp, aristocratic features and hair that fell in dark waves to his shoulders. His armor fit him perfectly, no longer hanging loose on a frail frame. He was tall, powerfully built, and radiating a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. This was the real Fernard, the eternal alpha, the wolf king of legend. Belvina's voice failed her. I'm what happens when you bind yourself to too many lost causes, Fernard said with a wry smile. Every time I married a Sun Queen's daughter, every time I tried to save one of your mother's line, the magic bond we created kept me alive, kept me young, but it also trapped me, because when they died, I didn't. I just continued, alone, getting older and older on the inside while my body refused to age. How many? Belvina asked. How many times have you done this? 4. Including you. His jaw tightened. The first was 200 years ago. Her name was Solara. She was the Sun Queen's granddaughter, and she was brilliant. Fierce. We were married for 3 years before the syndicate found her. They killed her in front of me. Belvina's chest ached. The second was a century later. Meridian. She lasted 6 months. The third was your mother's cousin, Arya. She survived 2 years. He looked away. Each time, I thought I'd planned better, prepared more, been smarter, and each time they died anyway. And my mother? Fina wasn't supposed to be part of this. She wasn't a target. She'd hidden her magic so well that the syndicate didn't even know what she was. Fernard's voice roughened. But then she met your father, and he found out, and he sold her to Thorn for a trade agreement and a promise of power. You knew her. I knew of her. I was watching the bloodline, trying to track the next daughter who would manifest strong enough to fight. But Fina's magic was dormant. She'd chosen a quiet life. His eyes met Belvina's. And then she had you, and everything changed. Belvina felt tears prick her eyes. She called you. The night she died. She did. She told me about you. About what Alberto and Bruna had done. About the poison. Fernard's hands clenched. She made me promise to protect you. To train you. To give you the chance she never had. So you came to me in the dreams. I did. And I watched you grow. Watched you endure things no child should ever have to endure. Watched you become stronger than any warrior I'd ever trained. He stepped closer. And I realized something. What? That you weren't like the others. Solara was powerful but reckless. Meridian was brilliant but fragile. Arya was brave but impulsive. His hand came up to cup her cheek. But you, Belvina, you're patient. Strategic. You spent 19 years building a perfect cover, gathering intelligence, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. You're not just a Sun Queen's daughter. You're a general. Belvina's breath caught. That's why I chose you, Fernard said softly. Not because I needed another weapon against the syndicate, but because you're the one who can actually win. The weight of his words settled over her like a mantle. What if I fail? She whispered. You won't. But what if? Belvina. He leaned his forehead against hers. I've lived 200 years. I've fought wars, trained armies, hunted monsters that would make gods weep. And in all that time, I have never been more certain of anything than I am of you. She closed her eyes, letting his certainty anchor her. What happens now? She asked. Now we finish what your mother started. He pulled back, and his smile was fierce. The syndicate thinks they've been hunting your bloodline. But they're wrong. We've been hunting them. And tonight we stop hiding. Belvina nodded. She was ready. Below, in the courtyard, the crowd had grown. Word of the golden light had spread, and people were pouring out of the keep, out of the village, gathering to see what had happened. Fernand took her hand. They need to see you. The real you. Not the frightened girl Alberto sold. Not the weak bride everyone pitied. They need to see their queen. I don't know how to be a queen. Yes, you do. You've been one your entire life. You just didn't have the crown yet. He gestured toward the stairs. Come on. Let's give them something to believe in. They descended together, and with every step, Belvina felt the magic settling into her bones. It didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt right. When they reached the courtyard, silence fell. Hundreds of faces turned toward them. Nobles, servants, guards, villagers, all of them staring. Fernand raised his voice, letting it carry across the space. People of Redstone Keep, you have witnessed tonight the unmasking of traitors. Lord Alberto Randolph and Elder Thorn have confessed to the murder of Lady Fina. They have confessed to serving the Shadow Syndicate. And they have confessed to attempting to murder your king. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. But you have also witnessed something else. Fernand gestured to Belvina. You have witnessed the awakening of the Sun Queen's daughter, the true heir of the light, the one your grandparents told you was only legend. Belvina stepped forward, and the lingering glow beneath her skin brightened. Not blinding this time, just enough to prove what she was. My mother was murdered because she carried magic the Syndicate feared, Belvina said, her voice steady. My childhood was stolen because powerful men wanted to erase what I could become. And tonight, I was sold like cattle because my own father valued gold more than his daughter's life. She looked across the crowd, meeting eyes, making connections. But I survived, and I am here to tell you that the Syndicate's reign of terror ends now. Not just in this keep, not just in this kingdom, everywhere. The crowd erupted in cheers. Fernand stepped beside her. The bond between a Sun Queen's daughter and the Wolf King is unbreakable. Together, we will hunt every member of the Syndicate. We will drag their secrets into the light. And we will make sure that no family ever suffers what Belvina's family suffered. More cheers. Louder now. Belvina raised her hand, and the crowd quieted. I know you're afraid, she said. I know you've spent your lives being told that magic is dangerous, that people like me are threats. But I promise you this. I will never use this power to harm the innocent. I will only use it to protect, to defend, to bring justice to those who thought themselves untouchable. Someone in the crowd shouted, Long live the Sun Queen. Others picked up the chant, Long live the Sun Queen. Long live the Wolf King. The sound rolled across the courtyard like thunder. Belvina felt tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. Fernand leaned close. How does it feel? Terrifying, she admitted. And perfect. He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made him look even younger. Then his expression shifted. We have about 3 hours until dawn. That's when the magistrates will arrive, and we'll begin the formal trials. But before that happens, there's something you need to see. What? Your mother left you something. Something she hid before she died, just in case. He gestured toward the keep. It's in the vault beneath the chapel. I've been guarding it for 14 years. Belvina's heart raced. What is it? The truth about your bloodline. About what you're really capable of. His smile was gentle. And about the weapon that's going to help us destroy the Syndicate once and for all. They moved through the crowd, which parted respectfully now. People reached out to touch Belvina's gown as she passed, as though her light could bless them. She didn't pull away. They entered the keep and descended into the lower levels, past the dungeons where Alberto and Thorn were being held, deeper into the oldest part of the fortress. The chapel was small and cold, lit only by a few flickering candles. At the far end, behind the altar, was a door Belvina had never noticed before. Fernand pulled a key from around his neck and unlocked it. The vault beyond was tiny, barely larger than a closet, but the walls were covered in protective runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. In the center of the room sat a wooden chest, carved with symbols Belvina recognized from her dreams. Sun Queen markers. Your mother put this here the week before she died, Fernand said quietly. She knew what was coming. She knew she wouldn't survive, so she made sure you'd have what you needed. Belvina knelt in front of the chest. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a book, leather-bound, ancient, filled with pages of handwritten text. Her mother's handwriting. Belvina's vision blurred as she lifted it carefully. The first page read, To my daughter, my light, my son. If you're reading this, then I am gone. But you are not alone. Everything you need to know is here. Everything I couldn't teach you in life, I've written down in death. Be brave, my Belvina. Be fierce. And burn them all down." Belvina pressed the book to her chest, tears streaming freely now. "There's more," Fernand said gently. She looked back into the chest. Beneath the book was a sword. Not steel. Not iron. Pure solidified sunlight, shaped into a blade that glowed even in the darkness. "She forged it herself," Fernand said, "using the last of her magic. It's keyed to your bloodline. No one else can wield it." Belvina reached out and wrapped her fingers around the hilt. The moment she touched it, the blade flared brilliant gold. Power surged through her. Not painful, but overwhelming. Like touching the sun itself. She stood, lifting the sword, and it felt weightless in her hand. "Perfect. This is what the Syndicate fears," Fernand said. "Not just your magic. Your legacy. The proof that the Sun Queen's line isn't extinct. That the light still burns." Belvina looked at the blade, at the runes carved along its length, at the way it seemed to hum with life. And she understood. This wasn't just a weapon. This was her mother's final gift. Her final act of love. A way to fight back. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was coming. And with it, the trials. The confessions. The unraveling of a conspiracy that had lasted centuries. But somewhere in the darkness beyond Redstone Keep, the higher members of the Shadow Syndicate were waking to the news that a Sun Queen's daughter had manifested. That the Wolf King had revealed himself. That their carefully constructed web of secrets was about to be torn apart. And they were gathering, calling in favors, assembling their own armies, because they knew what Belvina didn't know yet, that the 7 syndicate members in the keep weren't the only ones, that Elder Thorn wasn't the highest-ranking operative, that the real leader, the one who had orchestrated Fina's death, who had hunted Sun Queens for 1,000 years, was already on his way to Redstone Keep. And he was bringing an army that could blot out the sun. Chapter 8. Climax, the Final Judgment. Dawn broke cold and gray over Redstone Keep. Belvina stood in the great hall, her mother's sword belted at her waist, watching as the magistrates filed in. 3 of them, sent from the neighboring kingdoms. Neutral parties who could witness and record without bias. Behind them came the truthsayers. Mages trained specifically to detect lies. Their eyes covered with enchanted silk that let them see only honesty or deception. And behind them came the recorders, scribes who would document every word spoken, every confession made, creating an official record that couldn't be disputed or destroyed. The hall had been transformed overnight. The tables cleared, the decorations stripped away. In their place stood a formal tribunal, a raised platform where the magistrates would sit, and below it, 2 chairs where the accused would be questioned. Belvina took her place beside Fernand at the high table. She wore simpler clothes now, a fitted black tunic and trousers, practical and clean. But the glow beneath her skin remained, and the sword at her hip blazed with light every time someone looked at it too long. The crowd filled in. Nobles, servants, villagers, everyone who could fit. They'd come to see justice. Or vengeance. Maybe both. If you've ever sat in a courtroom, waiting for a verdict that would change your life, if you've ever watched someone who hurt you finally face consequences, then maybe you understand what Belvina felt in that moment. That terrible mix of hope and fear. The knowledge that this could go right or horribly wrong. The weight of knowing that everything you've survived has led to this single moment. And maybe if you've been there, you also know how lonely it feels. Even surrounded by people. Even with allies at your side. Because in the end, the pain is yours. The loss is yours. And no amount of justice can bring back what was taken. But you stand there anyway, because it's the only way forward. The head magistrate, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, called the hall to order. "We are convened under the authority of the Northern Alliance to investigate charges of murder, conspiracy, and treason against Lord Alberto Randolph and Elder Thorn of Redstone Keep. Let the accused be brought forth." Guards dragged Alberto and Thorn into the hall in chains. Alberto looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. Thorn, by contrast, looked calm, almost serene. That worried Belvina more than anything. The 2 men were forced into the chairs facing the tribunal. "Lord Randolph," the magistrate began, "you stand accused of murdering your wife, Lady Fina, through the use of poison. How do you answer?" Alberto's mouth worked. He tried to speak, tried to lie, but the truth binding clamped down. Guilty, he gasped. The crowd murmured. And you did this under whose orders? Alberto's gaze flicked to Thorn. His. The Shadow Syndicate. They told me. They said if I didn't, they'd kill us all. My daughters. My house. Everything. So you chose to save yourself by murdering your wife. Yes. Yes, I did. The magistrate's expression didn't change. And what of your daughter Belvina? Did you know she carried the same magic as her mother? I suspected. Thorn confirmed it when she was young. He said as long as she stayed ignorant, stayed weak, the syndicate wouldn't touch her. But you sold her anyway. To King Fernard. Thorn said it was safe. He said the king was dying, that it would be over quickly, that we'd have the gold and the alliance and… Alberto broke off, his voice cracking. I thought I was protecting her. By selling her to a man you believed would die and leave her a widow at 19. Alberto had no answer. The magistrate turned to Thorn. Elder Thorn, you are accused of being a high-ranking member of the Shadow Syndicate, of orchestrating the murders of multiple Sun Queen descendants, of conspiracy to commit regicide. How do you answer? Thorn smiled. Guilty on all counts, he said calmly. The hall erupted. The magistrate called for silence. You confess freely? Why not? You have me. The truth binding ensures I can't lie even if I wanted to. Thorn leaned back in his chair, chains clinking. Besides, it doesn't matter. You can execute me, imprison me, parade me through every kingdom. It changes nothing. Explain, Fernard said coldly. Thorn's smile widened. Because I'm not the one you should fear. I'm a facilitator, a recruiter, a middle manager, if you will. He looked directly at Belvina. The one who ordered your mother's death? He's not here. He's never here. He's much too important for that. Belvina's blood ran cold. Who is he? Oh, I can't tell you that. Not because of the binding. I genuinely don't know his real name. We call him the Archon. He's led the syndicate for over 1,000 years. That's impossible, one of the magistrates said. No one lives that long. Sun Queens do. Or did, before we hunted them to extinction. Thorn's eyes glittered. What makes you think we didn't steal that magic for ourselves? Fernard's hand slammed down on the table. Where is he? Coming, Thorn said simply. He felt the awakening last night. Felt the surge of Sun Queen magic. And he's very, very interested in meeting the girl who inherited it. Belvina's hand went to her sword. When? Fernard demanded. Soon. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. He doesn't share his plans with the likes of me. Thorn's smile faded. But when he arrives, you'll know. Because he doesn't come alone. Before anyone could respond, the hall doors slammed open. A guard stumbled in, breathless and pale. Your Majesty. The outer watchtowers, they're reporting movement. An army. Thousands of them. Marching from the east. Fernard was on his feet instantly. How far? 6 hours. Maybe less. The hall descended into chaos. Nobles shouted questions. Guards rushed to prepare defenses. Villagers screamed. But Belvina stood perfectly still, her mind racing. 6 hours. They had 6 hours to prepare for a battle against an enemy they didn't understand, led by a man who'd been hunting her bloodline for a millennium. She looked at Fernard. He was already moving, shouting orders, organizing the defenses. But his eyes met hers across the chaos, and she saw the truth there. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and the Archon was coming for her. We need to evacuate the civilians, Belvina said, her voice cutting through the noise. Fernard nodded. Agreed. Get the women and children into the deep tunnels beneath the keep. Seal them in. Guards with them. What about the trials? Over. We have confessions on record. That's enough. He gestured to the magistrates. Get them out. Now. Ride hard for the Alliance and tell them what's happening here. The magistrates fled. Belvina turned to the guards still holding Alberto and Thorn. Take them back to the dungeons. Triple the locks. If the Archon is coming for anyone, it's them. The guards obeyed, dragging the prisoners away. Thorn called over his shoulder, still smiling. You can't win, girl. He's been doing this for 1,000 years. What makes you think 19 years of playing dress-up makes you his equal? Belvina didn't answer. She just watched him go, her hand tight on her sword. When the hall finally cleared, it was just her and Fernard. Tell me the truth, she said quietly. Can we survive this? Fernard was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know. It was the most honest answer he'd ever given her. And somehow, that made her feel better. Then we make our stand anyway, Belvina said. We fight. And if we fall taking as many of them with us as we can. Fernard's smile was fierce and proud. Spoken like a true queen. They had 6 hours. 6 hours to prepare. To fortify. To figure out how two people, one newly awakened Sun Queen and one ancient Wolf King, could hold off an army led by a man who'd spent 1,000 years perfecting the art of killing people exactly like them. Belvina looked out the narrow window at the gray dawn sky, and she thought of her mother, of Fina's smile, her songs, her strength. Be brave, my Belvina. Be fierce. And burn them all down. I will, Mama, Belvina whispered. I promise. She turned to Fernard. What do we do first? First, Fernard's eyes blazed violet. We wake the wolves. Outside, storm clouds were gathering. The wind picked up, howling through the peaks like a warning. And 6 hours to the east, an army marched in perfect formation. 10,000 strong, clad in black armor, carrying banners marked with a symbol that had been feared for centuries. The eclipse, the sign of the Shadow Syndicate. At the head of the army rode a figure in silver armor, his face hidden behind a mask shaped like the sun. The Archon. And he was smiling, because he'd been hunting Sun Queens for 1,000 years. And he'd never lost. If you're holding your breath right now, if your heart is pounding wondering how Belvina could possibly survive this, good. That means you're feeling what she's feeling. That means you understand what it's like to face impossible odds with nothing but courage and a promise to the people you've lost. If you need to see her rise, if you need to see her win, then subscribe right now. Because the final battle is coming, and it's going to be legendary. Chapter 9, Resolution, the Golden Dawn. The wolves came at sunset. Not literal wolves, though there were some of those too, summoned by Fernard's magic from the deep forests. But mostly they were warriors, soldiers, hunters, people who'd been waiting their entire lives for the Wolf King to call them to battle. They poured into Redstone Keep from every direction. Some came from the mountain villages, some from the neighboring kingdoms, some from places so remote Belvina had never heard their names. But they all came, because the Wolf King had awakened, and the Sun Queen's daughter stood with him. Belvina watched from the battlements as the forces assembled in the courtyard below. Maybe 3,000 fighters. Well-trained, well-armed, loyal. But still outnumbered 3-1. It's not enough, she said quietly. Fernard stood beside her, his armor gleaming in the fading light. Numbers aren't everything. They help. So does magic. He gestured to the sword at her hip. That blade your mother made? It's not just a weapon, Belvina. It's a catalyst. It amplifies Sun Queen magic 100-fold. I don't know how to use it. Yes, you do. You've been training for this your entire life. You just didn't know what you were training for. He turned to face her fully. Your mother didn't just teach you to be invisible, Belvina. She taught you to observe, to think, to strategize. Those skills matter more in battle than brute strength. What if it's not enough? Then we adapt. His smile was fierce. But I don't think it will come to that. Because you have something the Archon doesn't. What? An army that's fighting for something, not just against it. These people aren't here because they're paid or forced. They're here because they believe in you, in what you represent. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Hope is a powerful weapon, Belvina. Never underestimate it. Below, a horn sounded. The eastern watchtowers were signaling. The Syndicate army had been spotted. 2 hours away. Maybe less. Fernard raised his voice, letting it carry across the courtyard. Defenders of Redstone Keep. The Shadow Syndicate marches toward us with an army 10,000 strong. They come to destroy the last Sun Queen's daughter, to extinguish the light that threatens their reign of darkness. The crowd quieted, every eye on him. But they will fail, because we are not afraid. We are not broken, and we will not yield. He drew his sword, a massive blade that crackled with violet lightning. Tonight we make our stand. Tonight, we show them that the light cannot be extinguished, that hope cannot be killed, that as long as one person stands against the darkness, the fight is not over. The crowd roared. Belvina felt the sound vibrate through her chest, felt the hope, the determination, the fierce defiance. And she realized Fernard was right. This wasn't just an army. This was a movement. She drew her mother's sword, and it blazed brilliant gold. For every Sun Queen they murdered, for every family they destroyed, for every child who grew up afraid of their own magic, we fight. The roar doubled. Weapons clashed against shields. Voices rose in a battle cry that echoed off the mountains. and Belvina felt her magic surge in response. Not just her own power, but the collective strength of everyone around her. Their hope, their courage, their belief. It poured into her like a river, and she channeled it into the sword. The blade exploded with light, so bright it turned the twilight to noon. The crowd gasped, then cheered louder than ever. Fernard leaned close. "Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you." Belvina's throat tightened. "Don't talk like we're going to lose." "I'm not. I'm talking like a man who's finally found someone worth fighting beside." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Now let's go remind the syndicate why they've been afraid of your bloodline for 1,000 years." They descended to the courtyard and took their positions at the main gate. The army arranged itself in defensive formations. Archers on the walls, infantry in the courtyard, cavalry ready to flank. And at the center of it all, Belvina and Fernard stood side by side, waiting. The sun dipped below the horizon. Darkness fell. And then, in the distance, they saw it. Torches. Thousands of them, moving like a river of fire across the valley. The syndicate army. Belvina's heart hammered, but she kept her breathing steady. The torches drew closer, closer, and then they stopped. A single rider broke away from the mass and approached the gate alone. The Archon. His silver armor caught the moonlight, making him look like a ghost. The sun-shaped mask hid his face completely. He stopped just outside arrow range and raised his voice. "Sun Queen's daughter, I offer you one chance to surrender. Come with me willingly, and your people will be spared. Refuse, and we will burn this keep to ash and everyone in it." Belvina stepped forward, her sword blazing. "I am Belvina, daughter of Fina, heir to the Sun Queen's light, and I do not negotiate with murderers." The Archon tilted his head. "Brave words. Foolish but brave." He paused. "Your mother said something similar. Right before I killed her." Rage exploded through Belvina. White hot. Blinding. She raised her sword, and the light intensified until it was almost unbearable. "You want me?" she shouted. "Then come and take me." The Archon laughed. "As you wish." He raised his hand, and the army behind him surged forward. 10,000 soldiers. Charging. Fernard's voice rang out. "Hold!" The defenders braced. The syndicate army closed the distance. 50 yards. 40. 30. Hold. 20 yards. Belvina could see their faces now. Blank. Empty. Like they weren't even human anymore. 10 yards. "Now!" Fernard roared. Belvina slammed her sword into the ground, and the world exploded with light. A shockwave of pure Sun Queen magic erupted from the blade, radiating outward in a golden wave. It swept across the charging army like a tsunami, and everywhere it touched, the syndicate soldiers screamed. Not in pain, in release, because they weren't soldiers. They were thralls, people enslaved by syndicate magic, their wills stripped away, their bodies turned into puppets. And Belvina's light was breaking the chains. One by one, the soldiers collapsed. Not dead, just freed. The magic controlling them shattered like glass, and they fell to their knees, gasping, weeping, human again. Within seconds, half the army was down. The other half hesitated, confused. And Fernard's forces charged. The battle became chaos. Steel clashed. Magic flared. Screams echoed across the valley. But Belvina's focus narrowed to one target. The Archon. He stood in the center of the battlefield, watching, unmoving. She charged toward him, her sword blazing. He drew his own weapon, a blade made of shadow and ice, the opposite of everything she was. They met in a clash of light and darkness. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, knocking soldiers off their feet. "You're strong," the Archon said, his voice muffled by the mask. "Stronger than your mother, but still not strong enough." "We'll see," Belvina snarled. They fought, blade against blade, light against shadow. Belvina had never trained for this, never held a sword before tonight. But her mother's magic guided her, showed her where to strike, where to block. And she realized something. The Archon wasn't trying to kill her. He was testing her. "You could be magnificent," he said, deflecting her strike. "Join us. Take your place as the true Sun Queen. Rule beside me." "Never." "Why not?" "We could reshape the world. End the chaos. Bring order. By enslaving people. By stealing their magic." Belvina's blade slashed across his armor, drawing sparks. "That's not order. That's tyranny. It's survival." The Archon's blade moved faster now. "The world is cruel, child. The strong devour the weak. I'm simply ensuring I remain strong. And that's why you'll lose. She feinted left, then drove her blade upward. It pierced through a gap in his armor, straight into his chest. The Archon gasped. Light poured from the wound, burning away the shadow magic that sustained him. Impossible, he whispered. I've lived 1,000 years. And now it's over. Belvina twisted the blade. The Archon's mask fell away. Beneath it was a face that had once been handsome, noble. But 1,000 years of stolen magic had twisted it into something monstrous. His eyes met hers, and for just a moment she saw fear. Then he crumbled to dust. The moment he died, the rest of the Syndicate army collapsed. Not freed like the thralls, just gone, disintegrated, because they'd been sustained by the Archon's magic. And without him, they were nothing. Silence fell across the battlefield. Belvina stood alone in the center, breathing hard, her sword still blazing. And then the cheering started. Her soldiers, the freed thralls, everyone, they'd won. Fernard appeared beside her, blood-streaked but grinning. I told you. Told me what? That you were going to be legendary. He pulled her into a fierce hug. Belvina laughed, shocked, relieved, exhausted. They'd actually done it. They'd won. Over the next days, the truth spread across the kingdoms. The Shadow Syndicate was broken. Its leader dead. Its networks exposed. Belvina and Fernard oversaw the trials of the remaining members, freed the enslaved, returned stolen magic to its rightful owners. And slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild. Not just Redstone Keep, but hope itself. On the morning of the 7th day, Belvina stood on the battlements watching the sunrise. Gold and pink and impossibly beautiful. Fernard joined her. How do you feel? Tired, she admitted. But good. Like I can finally breathe. You did more than survive, Belvina. You changed the world. She smiled. We changed it. Together. He took her hand. What do you want to do now? Belvina thought of her mother. Of the songs she used to sing about the Sun Queen flying on golden wings. I want to fly, she said. And Fernard's grin was fierce and bright. Then let's fly. The magic bond between them flared. And together they transformed. Not into wolves. Not into anything human. Into light itself. Golden and brilliant and free. They rose above the keep, above the mountains, into the endless sky. And for the first time in 19 years, Belvina felt truly, completely free. You made it. You stood with Belvina through every moment of fear, every act of courage, every impossible choice. You watched her rise from the girl everyone pitted to the queen no one could break. And if her story meant something to you, if you felt even a fraction of what she felt, then don't let it end here. Share this. Subscribe. Tell someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that hope is real, that even after 19 years of darkness, the sun still rises. Because stories like this, they're not just entertainment. They're proof that we can endure, that we can fight back, that we can win. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing. Now go shine. The end.